Hello everybody, welcome back. If you're new to the group, each week Molly and I present a word, and that word is designed to be a guide for meditation, contemplation, and discussion. And this week's word is Dark Ages. And Molly's discussion on Dark Ages was very personal and was talking about her experience with her family and her friends and her relationships. And I liked her discussion. I thought it was very important to remember that when it comes to this concept of Dark Ages, it's really personal. So my first thoughts on it were the bigger picture, the sort of historical worldview of the Dark Ages, and that pre-industrial, pre-farming time when things, with that area of history that was called the actual Dark Ages. And that made me think about the timeline of history and how each generation has some kind of struggle that they go through, some kind of period of time in their lives that are very difficult. And that impacts how we see the world, how we make our decisions, and culturally or as a society, how we feel about our current situation. So I've been reading a book lately that's about the Dust Bowl. So that Great Depression period that existed in America, and my grandparents that lived through that. My father was born in 1932 in Kansas. So he was a child of the Depression, a baby on a farm in Kansas during that Dust Bowl period, and how difficult life was for those families, and how their specific drivers, like their motivations at that time, a lot of those farmers were very proud of their land, very proud of what they owned and their farms and their communities, and it was very hard for them to leave even though the environment was becoming more and more hostile. And as you go through history, each generation has something like that. Each generation has maybe a war or an economic impact or an environmental impact that really frames the perspective of those generations. And this generation, for me, I think the biggest experience in my generation, I'm 41 years old or almost 41 years old, and that biggest impact for me was seeing 9/11 in America, and then the Great Recession that happened in the early 2000s, and now this global pandemic. So if I look at my experience, I have all of these markers that are traumatic that I share with my peers in my age group, and it looks a little bit different for each generation. So for my parents, who had lived through very difficult times in their history, some of these things didn't seem as impactful. They had a different perspective on it. And for me, it's going to look different for my kids. So my kids weren't even born for 9/11 and barely remember the Great Recession. But this global pandemic is going to have a huge impact because they're high school and college age children. So each one of us has this perspective based on the time that we lived through. And that was my first thought of the Dark Ages and what that really feels like for us on a generational level. I thought that was a really interesting way to look at Dark Ages. On a personal level, which was where Molly was taking it, as we talk about a lot in these conversations, each one of us has dark times, has tough times, and has light or bright or easy times. So we all go through that ebb and flow of difficult situations, difficult periods in our life, and easier or more fluid or more comfortable parts of our life. And those waves can be really emotionally destructive. They can be really emotionally challenging, and it can be very difficult to rise above that or to pick yourself up and move forward and get through that to the next phase. And I think the important part about understanding yourself and understanding the people around you is that the more you understand yourself, the more control you have over your mind and your emotional state, the less high and low those are. So the more shallow those waves are. So a broader understanding of yourself, a broader understanding of your connection to the universe, a serious understanding to that feeling of a higher power, or even if it's not one specific thing or one specific devotion that you have, but knowing that you're connected, knowing that you're strong, knowing that you have a connection to your ancestral roots, you came from somewhere, knowing that you're connected, whether you have children or not, you're connected to the future on an energetic level. And that those connections to something bigger than yourself can be hugely valuable when we're getting through tough times, and can be very good to remember in the good times, because it's easy to forget the bad times when you're feeling good, or you're in a good situation, or you have a good job, or you're in a good relationship. It's hard to remember, or we oftentimes forget what it was like to struggle, depending on how long those points of, having tough times and having kind of easier times are. We can forget what that feels like. So I thought that very personal look at Dark Ages was an interesting point of it, that we each have a struggle, and sometimes your job is going really well, but maybe your relationship is not. Or like I had for a long time, my parents were very ill, but my financial situation was improving. So even when you're having these ups and downs, you can have all these movements in between where some things are really going well and some things are not going well. So there's also a balance there. I talk a lot about balance in these videos, and that really does. I try when I have difficult times, I try to really look at even the small pieces within my life of, okay, this is tough right now, but this other part of my life is really going well, or this other part of my life is really a blessing, to try to keep that balance of my emotional state. And that's happening even within like the broader ebbs and flows of your life. So this idea still has that balance feeling. For me, it's more of a three-dimensional kind of balanced feeling, that you're going to have ups and downs in your life on a broad spectrum over a timeline. You're also going to have ups and downs in your life when it comes to different aspects of your life. So one thing's going well, but another thing's more difficult. So I think to stay positive and to remember that balance all the time when it comes to tough times is important. And to remember in our perspective that we have this very limited perspective on a generational level. So when you're talking to someone who's older than you or younger than you, they're going to have a really different experience in their life. And that little chunk of time that they've lived, that chunk of time that they have to frame their perspective around, to build their perspective around, definitely impacts how they see the world. And those differences, we can learn a lot from each other. We can learn from people who've gone before us, who've done a lot more than we have, or experienced a lot more than we have, and from the younger people who maybe haven't gone through as much and have a little lighter perspective, or just a different perspective on their current situation or their experience in life. So I think that it's really an interesting topic, and I enjoyed contemplating it. It was kind of a more of a vague subject. It didn't have as much specifically psychological pieces to it for me, but I did like that idea of a historical timeline, and then how we are each emotionally experiencing our lives, and those ups and downs, those ebbs and flows. So I hope you enjoyed my talk today, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts and comments. Thank you for showing up today.